Alright, what we're going to do here is create some masks on text and shapes. So first, what I'm going to have you start off doing is creating an ellipse. Now what I've done here, Control K, I've just created a standard project here, and I'm just going to name it masks. It's about, let's say, 15 seconds long, and the background color is insignificant, so it doesn't matter what you change it to. Alright, what I'm going to do first off is press Control T, or use the text tool here, and start off by typing a word. Hello. Alright, and I'm going to center that, clicking on it. The anchor point is at the bottom of the text, so I'm going to press Control Alt Home and Control Home to center the text. And I'm going to create another text layer, so I'm just going to copy this, Control D, and I'm going to name it a different word. I'm going to hide this word now, and Control T, double click inside of this, and type the next word. Alright, now I'm going to work at one word at a time. I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger, which is fine, about the same length as the other word. Alright, and I'm going to stack it like so. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is turn on the grid here. It's Control apostrophe, and I'm going to line up these words a little bit better on the grid so I can tell where I'm moving, where I came from, and all that. So this word right here needs to be scaled a little bit more too, so it's the same. It exists inside of this green grid here, and it's going to go to the top of this box. All right. All right, what I'm going to do now is leave the grid on, and I'm going to do one word at a time. So first I'm going to use the shape tool, and I'm going to create a mask on the bottom word, hello. In order to do this, I have to have the layer selected. If you do this and you see a shape on the screen, it's only because you did not select the layer that you're going to put a mask on. So I'm selecting hello right now, and I'm going to go just outside the bounds of the word. So the mask completely fills, but not too much, the word. And now I'm going to do the same thing to this word. Okay. Now closing this up and closing this up. What I'm going to do now is animate the text first. So I'm going to select all the layers with Control A. I'm going to press P to activate the position on both layers. And I'm going to use the Move tool, which is V. And I'm going to set, let's say at 15 frames, I want these words to be in this position right now. So I can go ahead and hit the position keyframe, and that will lock in this position at this point in time for each one of the words. Now I'm just going to go down here on the timeline and move the scrubber to, let's say, half of 15 is 7.5, so I'm just going to go with 7, and I'm going to move this layer down. I want this top of the word to be where the bottom of the word is right now. So that means I'm going to move to this grid point right here, the text. So I'm just going to move it down to there. So I can test it again to see if I did it correctly. Let's see. The bottom of the word is at this point, just a little bit underneath this grid line here. And if I go back, let's see if it does the same. And it is just a little bit below the grid point. So now I'm going to do the same thing with this here as well. But I want it to come, let's say I want it to come from above and down. So now I want the bottom of this word to be where the top of this word is right now. So I'm just going to hold shift and drag this layer up. If you hold shift, it'll drag it in a straight line, and now I'm going to check it to see if it did it correctly. So here is what the animation looks like thus far. Everything just meets in the middle, and now I'm going to press play and time it. It's kind of slow, so I'm going to zoom in and drag these first two keyframes and move them a little bit closer. What it's at exactly, let's say it's 9 frames. So now I'm going to test it, play, It's a little too slow for me, so I'm going to move it to 10. So this is going to all happen within the time frame of 5 frames. And now what I'm going to do, if you notice the animation, these, and I've explained this in class, the text simply goes from position A to position B, this being position A, this being position B, and it does it at one solid speed. It doesn't slow down as it gets closer to its resting point, and it doesn't start moving slow, but I want it to. I want it to ease into position. So I want it to start from this point, and I want it to ease into this keyframe here. So what I'm going to do is select that keyframe and press F9. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. It's called ease in. Press F9 after you click, and you'll see the slight difference maybe. It slowly goes into position. So that's probably not as dramatically obvious as it would be on something that's moving a lot quicker and a further distance. So what I'm going to do now is simply put on a mask. I'm sorry, we already put on a mask. I'm going to animate the mask. So position is from 9 frames now to 15 frames. I moved those around. You can move them if you like. So what I'm going to do is open up this layer first. I'm going to open up the mask and open it up again. And I'm going to change this mask from add to subtract. And now what I'm going to do is hit the keyframe for mask path. Essentially what I'm going to do is make this mask stay here. And what that means is when the text moves beyond the bounds of this mask parameter, which is this rectangle here, it will be seen because it's subtract. Subtract means anything that the mask parameter is covering will be subtracted from the scene on that layer, whatever's on that layer. And if I change it to add, that means that the only thing that will be seen on this layer is what is inside of the mask parameter here. I want it to be subtract. And you'll notice when I take the animation to the right, the mask stays with the text. So what I have to do is just move it back to where it started from. And if I look here, there's probably a better way of doing this. We can probably create a shape that simply stays here, and we can pick whip that to the position of that shape, and then the mask path will never leave. We'll do that in the future. Today I want you to learn it this way. It's a little bit quicker and a little less confusing. Once you get the understanding of this, then we can start pick whipping the position of other layers. So I'm just going to be mindful of this grid point right here with this grip. So I'm just going to drag the mask back up at this point of the position of the animation. So I do that by first, with the move tool selected, clicking the border of the mask, and I'm going to click on the mask first, and then I'm going to hold shift and drag up, trying to get it exactly where it came from. And I'm just going to test it to see if it moved a little bit, and it did. So what I'm going to do, I don't know why it did that. I only have 2 keyframes there, and it appears to be moving down here. So what I'm going to do is simply go to the position right in between these 2 keyframes and just move it back to where I want it to be and tell it to stay. And again, I'm just going to go here. This is where pick whipping the position of this mask to another layer would be beneficial. But I want you to understand how it works first, and then we can pick whip stuff in the next lesson. So if I were to fit this up to 100%, and I'm going to hit the home key on the keyboard to go back to the beginning of the animation, I'm going to press the space bar to play it, and Delirium appears out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere. And the mask should stay relatively in the same spot. In the future, we will be able to lock that into place, but I'm just going to continue with what we're doing now. Alright, so now I'm going to do Delirium next. I'm sorry, I'm going to do Hello next. So I already have the mask on there. I'm just going to open up the mask option, change it to subtract. This mask is likely to do the same thing. I believe it's because there is an ease in and ease out on the layer that it is, on the text that it is on. So I'm going to lock in the position of the mask path here and take note of where it is at currently. So it would be right here, and I can mark that with my finger that you can't see off screen. And I'm going to drag the scrubber here to the last keyframe, and I'm going to double click the mask parameter, or the edge of it, and now I'm just going to hold shift and drag down. And again, it's probably moving all over the place because of the ease in, ease out, and it looks like that's what it's doing. So what I'm going to do is just tell it to stay. Alright, this might be a little painstaking. That's why doing it this way is not the best practice, but it's a good way to start off learning. The best way to go about it is pick whipping it to position with a dummy shape, which we will do. Again, I can't say that enough. So that moves slightly, but that's good enough for what we're doing. So now fed up to 100%, I'm going to close these up and press play and see what it looks like. Delirium, hello. And if I want to space that out a little bit, I want hello to come in first and then delirium to come in second. All I have to do is just click on this this layer here, and I'll drag it. So now I can test to see what it looks like. Hello, delirium. All right. Now I'm going to pre-compose these two layers here. I'm just going to press Control-Shift-C and call this text. And now I'm going to have a shape appear in the background of this. So now I'm going to do that down here, deselecting the layer. If you create a shape with this layer selected, it's going to put a mask on it. So I'm just going to create a random ellipse here with a stroke on it. Hold shift, making the ellipse. And I don't really need the grid anymore, so I'm going to press Control apostrophe to get rid of it. And as you notice, the anchor point of this ellipse is not where it should be. So I'm going to press Control Home and Control Home to center it. Excuse me. And now to test the placement of where this shape is going to look the best and what scale it needs to be at, I'm going to center this pre-composed layer again. Control Home, Control Home. Looks like it's in the center. And I just need to scale this ellipse here so it is a little bit bigger. All right. So when this text comes up, this is where I want the ellipse to be. So I'm going to go ahead and open up all the transforms for this option and just set a keyframe for each one of them. I don't know what I'm going to affect yet, so I'm just going to turn on position, scale, rotation, and opacity, telling the computer that at this point, which happens to be 22 frames, I want this to look the way it does right now. Okay, so let's say at 15 frames before delirium comes in, I don't want this ellipse to be here at all, so I'm going to click on the scale and press 0, and now see what happens. Okay. I would like delirium to be a little bit closer in. That's fine. So in between the scale options, right here you have 0% of scale of the ellipse, and at here you see that I have 211%. Let's just go ahead and call it a 220 to make it easy to understand. And now somewhere in here, between the first keyframe of scale and the second keyframe of scale, if 220% is what I end at, I want to go a little bit bigger so it looks like it's going out of bounds and coming back in. So it's getting a little bit bigger, and then it goes back to 100%. It scales down a little bit. That's not noticeable, so I'm just going to change the scale here of this so it fits on the screen, and then I'm going to go to this keyframe here, hovering exactly over top of it, and I'm going to change the scale so it's dramatically obvious when it gets bigger and scales down. All right, and what I'm going to do here is F9 this and F9 that to ease in and ease out of that position. Okay, that's a little bit jarring, so maybe I select this and move it to the right a little bit and give the text a little bit of opportunity to come in first. And what I can do is select the start of this animation and drag it to the left a little bit so it doesn't happen as quick. It seems a little less jarring. That's a little bit better. Now if I were doing this for a design, I would probably sit down and plan this all out nicely, but I am just making this up as I go. All right, now the next thing that I'm going to do is copy this this ellipse. So I'm going to press Control D. I'm going to turn off the copy right now, and I'm going to go to the very first shape layer 1 that we created, and I'm just going to call this ellipse 1. And this I'm going to call, press enter to rename the layer dashed circle. And turn this back on. And I'm going to change some things about this. I'm going to turn the fill off. You do that by clicking on the word fill, clicking this white rectangle with a red line through it. And I'm going to leave the stroke where it's at. And I am going to change the line type of this and the scale. So I'm going to press, I'm going to open up all the options on this, open up transform, and I'm going to get rid of everything that is on it right now, all these keyframes. And I can quickly do that just by clicking on the, if I have all these selected, and I can select that just by dragging through here. You see it selects everything. I can turn on and off everything all at once. So by turning it off, clicking the stopwatch for the second time, it clears everything out. So right now I just have this big circle on the screen, and I don't want it to be here yet. But first I want to see what scale I want it to go to. So I'm going to change the scale of this ellipse for the last time. That's pretty good right there. So this ellipse right here, I'm just going to go ahead and leave at this scale. And I'm going to open up the contents, close the transform for now, open up ellipse 1, open up stroke 1. And now I'm going to change the look of this. So I'm going to add dashes to this. And you can change the number of dashes here, or the space between a dash, the size of the dash. I believe that's the size of the dash. And now what I'm going to do is simply animate the scale, and I want this to pop up from behind of this the ellipse 1. I'm going to animate the scale first. So I want it to start popping up when this is already into position. So I don't want it to start off here. So I'm going to change the scale of this to be right, let's say at, what is that, 25 frames. The scale is going to be where it's at right now. And I always work backwards. I always keep the scale where I want it. I set in the keyframe where I want it to be, and then I work backwards. Now I'm going to change the scale at this point to 0. So now let's see what it looks like. Okay. And let's see if it looks nice if I go beyond the bounds on this animation as well. And that looks okay. It looks kind of stiff, but that's right. And again, good practice F9, ease in, ease out. Let's see what it looks like. Probably not a big noticeable difference. Okay. And also what I want to start happening is rotation. So this thing is going to rotate around. All right. So I'm going to turn on the stopwatch by pressing R, clicking the stopwatch here. I'm going to press position again so I know, or is it scale? Press S for scale so I know when this ellipse snaps into place. I'm going to press R after, let's say, somewhere down here. Doesn't really matter, but for the sake of this example, at 1 second and a half. So 15 frames, 30 frames a second. 15 would be a half, so that would be 1 second and a half, 1.5 seconds right there. And I'm going to press R again and say between this keyframe and this point in time, this object is going to rotate, let's say 3 times, and see what it looks like. Press F9 so it eases into that rotation. That was a little fast. It starts spinning so fast that it looks like it changes directions. So I'm going to change that to 1. And let's make this F9 as well. So 1 rotation in this amount of time is pretty quick. So maybe, let's say 0.5. Now it will only do, yeah, let's say 180 degrees. See what that looks like. So that's half a rotation. Still pretty quick. Really quick, which is fine. Let's just leave it at that. Alright, now I'm going to pre-compose all of this. I can do that quickly by pressing Control A, then Control-Shift-C, and I will just call this graphic. All right. And now what I'm going to do is just animate the entire thing, just changing scale and let's say position. So once this snaps into place, let's say right here, I want the position of this graphic to be right where it's at. So I'm going to press P on this pre-composed layer, turn on the stopwatch to lock in this position, and S as well to lock in the scale here because I want it to be at this perfect scale that I made it at. And I'm just going to move this off screen while holding Shift so it moves at a straight line. And that should have made a keyframe there, which it did. And at the scale, I'm going to change the scale, let's say, to 10% and see what it looks like. Okay, and I will go ahead and F9 that and change the scale at this point to 0 and see if it's even noticeable. Okay, maybe I can move the scale to the right so it becomes noticeable. That's a little more noticeable, I guess. Let's change the position so it happens at the same time, I guess. Let's see what it looks like. Alright, now that is it for today. So what we did learn here is how to do masks on text, and you can't even notice them. So maybe what I'll do in order to notice that is I'm just going to go ahead, delete the position and the scale. Whoops. But not for no reason here. You did see that you can pre-compose stuff that's obviously that has been pre-composed more than once. And then you can take that entire thing and animate the entire thing rather than going inside of this and animating each one of these layers moving on or off the screen. You can just pre-compose it and do it all as one object. There you go. So, you learned how to make a dashed stroke, you learned how to animate scale, position, rotation, and animate a mask. So that's it.